All right, welcome everyone to our October 2015 class, segment 2 class, working composite Pluto through the 12 houses. Today's class is Pluto in the 8th house. Before we get started though, first of all, our few bookkeeping slides. Here at EAN, you can study with us 3 different ways. You can listen to the free weekly audio podcasts that we publish. You can subscribe to the Astro Library, and of course you can become a student with our multimedia course. Here's a little more information on the EAN Astro Library. It's divided into 3 different sections. You can see them on your screen, the titles, the hours. You can subscribe for 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or do a monthly recurring that you can cancel at any time. Just for clarification process, these are all public webinars. This is the various lectures we've had through workshops and conferences over the years. This is different material than the classes that take place as a registered student of segment 1 or 2. Those classes, the registered students classes, they do not end up in the Astro Library. They are always on your account on our website, segment 1 and segment 2 classes, whichever courses of the segments of the course you are subscribed to. Here's our multimedia course, all 3 segments as you can see on your screen. We still offer these with the binder materials and DVDs. In addition, segments 1 and 2 can be ordered completely online, or with segments 1 and 2, you can do a combination of the physical materials and the online access. At this point, segment 3 is only available via the binder and materials. Future classes, we are filling in on the composite Pluto through the houses. Still looking for a volunteer for next month, November's class, current or former love interest for composite Pluto in the 9th house. And in January's class, looking for volunteer for composite Pluto in the 11th house yet. And so today we are going to look at composite Pluto in the 8th house. And after prepping the materials last week for segment 1, natal Pluto through the 8th house, or the Pluto in Scorpio generation, and then prepping the materials for today's class, which is composite Pluto in the 8th house, or the Pluto in Scorpio generation. Typically, these are souls born between 1983, 84, all the way up to 1995. These are the young adults just entering relationships today. What I have found in last week's material and in this week's material is it almost feels like it's germane or active for all of us. Because in evolutionary astrology, when we look at the archetype of a planet, a sign, and a house, it's an interchangeable archetype. Mars, Aries, first house, it is an archetype in consciousness. Venus, Taurus, second house, archetype in consciousness. And so when we look at Pluto as representative of the soul, whether individually or composite as a couple, a lot of the material that we will cover today can feel relevant to all of us. It is going to be more emphasized if you have a composite Pluto chart in the 8th house, or you have composite Pluto in the Pluto and Scorpio generation. However, as we go through this material and it seems to be relevant, again, I think it's just getting down to some of the basics of the archetype with Pluto, whether individually or in relationship. So composite Pluto in either Scorpio or 8th house is going to reflect a couple who are dealing with karmic issues together at a soul level versus the personality or egoic level. Now, Jeffrey said in his Pluto Volume 2 that in his experience, 20 years of reading astrology charts, 15,000 clients, he found that in composite charts, 40% of the people he drew in as clients had composite Pluto in the 8th house. I can't say I have that. I haven't done anywhere near as many composite charts as Jeffrey, but that's not an experience for me. So I can't say whether I would agree with this fact that he published in Pluto 2 or not. He did say, though, that it is one of the most difficult positions for composite Pluto because they are relating on a soul level, which operates so fairly unconscious for most of us, versus personality or ego, which we're more conscious of. So Scorpio or 8th house Pluto couples have an intense magnetic attraction toward each other. However, they also have a fear or repulsion going on at the same time. And this repulsion dynamic tends to operate in a more subconscious way. We're not really aware of it. And in the beginning of any relationship together for this composite Pluto house, the attraction can have a tendency to override fear, especially in the beginning of the relationship. Now, there are several reasons for a simultaneous attraction-repulsion complex with 8th house Pluto couples. And there are also a variety of reasons why they will respond to the magnetic attraction with each other heading into the relationship versus responding to the subconscious fear or repulsion, which could easily lead to saying no to any relationship. I'm not going to go there. We back it up and broaden it out where this is coming from. Pluto, Scorpio, and the 8th house correlate to the nature of our unconscious desire nature. The soul operates on a fairly unconscious level, especially for the consensus state of consciousness. And so the desires within our soul operate fairly unconsciously as well. Pluto, Scorpio, in the 8th house will also correlate to the reasons why we have the desires we have in either karmic, evolutionary, or psychological terms. The natures of those desires will determine the nature of whatever our motivations are within our soul, our intentions, the psychology of our consciousness. Why do some people desire the BMW? Why do some people desire enlightenment? Why do some people desire a mink coat? Why do some people desire a cabin out in the mountains away from the city? There is gazillion desires and gazillion reasons why we have those desires. But when we look at that totality of our desire nature, why we want the things we want, why we act the way we act, what we're going to recognize is a necessary limitation within consciousness of what is possible to actualize relative to the totality of our life and what is not possible to actualize. So humans become limited to a specific life focus determined by the nature of our desires as we progress from life to life. Pluto, Scorpio in the 8th house also correlate to the natural law of evolution, the desire to evolve and grow. So as humans, we're going to desire to evolve and grow beyond any of our limitations. And this creates attraction to people, circumstances, and symbols of power that represent something which we are not. And in becoming aware of being attracted to that which we are not, it also makes us aware of where we have these limitations within our soul. The nature of our attractions reflect the desire to grow, evolve, and metamorphose beyond those limitations. So as humans, we must become aware of the causes for these specific limitations. This occurs through forming relationships to that which symbolizes what we feel we need in order to grow. Forming relationships to people and symbols that we perceive we need to evolve is a very common motivation within most of us that causes an attraction to this person versus that person. Forming a relationship to that which we are not allows for that Plutonian osmosis to occur. In other words, we become that which we have formed a relationship to, causing evolution and growth to occur. We osmosis something we do not have within us, and we overcome something that has been a limitation up to this point, whether it is individually, natal Pluto 8th house or Scorpio, or whether it happens as a composite chart with a couple Pluto in the 8th house or Scorpio. One of the fundamental problems here is that most souls are not consciously aware of why we do the things we do. In other words, the source of our desires and motivations is primarily unconscious, whether individually or as a couple. And these unconscious desires, intentions, motivations are why attractions can appear to become compulsive. It's also why the karma of using someone or being used by someone occurs as well. And these unconscious desires, intentions, motivations are the source for violations of trust, betrayal, abandonment, loss, the famous Scorpio 8th house words. We can also have sexual karma produced here with this Pluto signature, because the deepest instinct in people is to sexualize that which we feel we need. It's relative to the need to be secure and to secure whatever will make us feel that way. And sexuality can be used as the vehicle to possess that which we desire and that which we feel we need in order to be secure. Scorpio 8th house Pluto couples have a mutual desire to possess and become what each symbolizes to the other. Each one will reflect certain capacities, qualities, abilities, and resources that the other has desired to develop. Most common examples, how many times do you see two people that end up in a relationship and one is very social and one is more quiet? Another example, one is a saver financially and the other is a spender financially. One desires to have children and one doesn't. All of a sudden they find themselves pregnant. There can be all kinds of reasons why we desire someone. Just reflect on your own relationships, those that did not succeed and those that have been successful on an intimate basis. And you can just most commonly recognize that there's differences between you. There can be those areas that can almost be like opposites attract between you. That is how we are on some of the deepest levels, perceiving the attraction to have something we have not yet learned or accomplished within ourselves. When it comes to this house or sign signature for composite Pluto, the mutual desire to possess and become what each symbolizes creates an energy that wants us to penetrate to the depth of each other's soul. Pluto 8th house, Pluto Scorpio. And it induces a wish to merge the souls together and become one soul. A combined soul that is larger, more powerful, and freer from limitation than the individual souls were alone before the merging. This mutual desire to possess each other is going to create its own unique problems over many lifetimes. One of the deepest problems is fear emanating from the individual egos. The ego structure within our personality or our subjective consciousness is what the soul creates in each and every life, and it can become intoxicated with its own life. In other words, that egoic part of ourself is what we know. It becomes used to feeling separate from the soul. It becomes used to being distinct, separate, individual from anyone else or anything else. And we become very attached to that ego. So the desire to merge at a soul level creates a fear in each partner of being pulled into the dark inner abscess through the other person. The fear that the sense of our individuality at an ego level will be extinguished. So there's deep magnetic attractions on a soul level, and there is a fear repulsion at an egoic level. And the tug on the soul level is always typically stronger at the beginning of the relationship. And then as time goes on, ego has the reaction, the fear, the repulsion come through. So what it creates in this Pluto signature is a simultaneous attraction-repulsion complex for these couples. Again, attraction on a soul level due to the unconscious desire to merge, repulsion at an ego level due to the fear of losing our distinct individual identity. This fundamental archetype of the simultaneous attraction-repulsion dynamic has caused and created its own karma between any two people with Pluto in the 8th house or Scorpio. The intention to merge the souls has created a condition within the combined consciousness wherein they have desired to penetrate to the very depths of one another at each other's soul level. Penetrating to the depth of one another's soul creates a condition that everything is exposed to the light of day. All of our psychological dynamics and complexes get exposed. All of our emotional dynamics, complexes get exposed. The reasons why we have these emotional, psychological dynamics get exposed. It is a cause of insecurity. There's nowhere to hide. The other one can see everything about us as if we're naked on a soul level. It will also cause an exposure of the nature of one another's motivations, intentions that are symbolized by the totality of their desire nature. It exposes the secrets, and it can be very insecurity causing, making us feel vulnerable. So the egocentric structures within each partner become afraid at regular intervals throughout their evolutionary journey with one another due to this penetration to the depth of our soul and the exposure of all of the dynamics and complexes and motivations and desires within us. The egocentric fear is based upon the elimination of our individual identity and the fear of becoming too exposed. Most of us are comfortable without the intensity and scrutiny of honest psychoanalytic self-examination, especially on a perpetual level, again and again. Now, merging actually requires the confronting and eliminating of all the existing impurities. It requires us to have these complexes exposed, motivations, intentions exposed, the exposure of anything within us that is not pure, the exposure of the impurities. The intense desire to penetrate to the depth of each other's soul in order to merge requires ongoing mutual exposure of one another's inner dynamics so that the impurities can surface. It's the intent of the merging. Yet it is not something that's easy to be comfortable with on an egoic level. It induces that fear of exposure, fear of losing identity, and it results in the tendency for these couples to experience a separation or termination of the relationship. Now just think about this in karmic terms as having happened in past lives. The magnetic attraction on a soul level, the fear and repulsion on an egoic level, as everything within us is exposed, as everything that is impure or distorted within us is exposed, it becomes too much and we run away. So karma gets created then when one or the other leaves the relationship, and especially when one or the other does not desire this to occur. One feels too exposed at an egoic level and leaves. The other one is still feeling the magnetic attraction on a soul level, was not ready for the relationship to end. So a violation of trust becomes a specific cause for karma in these situations. Both are getting exposed. One doesn't like it, leaves, and violates the trust of the one who wanted to remain in relationship. Imagine this carried through many lifetimes, back and forth, each one taking turns leaving. And we wonder why that repulsion, or why the attraction-repulsion intensifies in and of itself. So when one or the other or both have had the experience of trust violated, it creates feelings of being used or manipulated relative to getting something that one person or the other or both wanted from each other. So when there's that violation of trust, the termination of relationship commonly, the karma of being manipulated and used by one another can become one of the most common dynamics with this Pluto house signature. And it can end up going back and forth over many lifetimes, till at some point nobody knows who hurt who first, who left who first or last. So every other dynamic within the total beingness together as a couple becomes intensified individually and together due to this desire to merge souls. This Pluto signature creates some of the most intense relationships. So these two people can come together. They can have different Pluto house signatures. One can be a sixth house Pluto soul. One can be a 10th house Pluto soul, and the composite creates the 8th house. They can have south nodes with different signatures and signs and houses and aspects. This is going to relate to two individual souls who have different individual karmas separate from their karma with each other. However, anything they have individually on a karmic level gets intensified when they come together as a couple. Again, due to that desire to merge and penetrate to the deepest levels with each other on a soul level. And in this signature, that desire to merge produces a deep, permeating psychological knowledge and way of relating to one another. It means that each one has desired to understand the psychological dynamics of one another. What is the nature of each person's psychological and emotional needs? What is the nature of their sexual needs and desires, and for what reasons? Why do they want to be sexually active XYZ way, or to not be sexually active XYZ way? It helps them understand the nature of all existing sexual, emotional, and psychological wounds they have, with the intention of identifying the causes of those wounds and the intent to heal those wounds. And it also creates the psychological dynamics to penetrate to the depths of one another through the intensity of the sexuality of their relationship. So it creates this effect of any and all unresolved dynamics between them and as individuals, separate from each other, to surface from this life and past lives. So the whole karmic evolutionary complex gets brought in to the relationship. It always does, but it's more intense here because, again, the Pluto archetype in the 8th house or Scorpio requires this stuff to surface in order to evolve. Think about this for a moment with these young souls that are on planet Earth from 1983, 84 to 1995. They range in age from 20 years old to, what would this be, 32, 33 years old. And so here are all these souls in their 20s, any country, any race, any culture, running around planetary Earth right now, going through all this stuff. And in its distortions, we wonder why, they pick up a gun and shoot each other. We wonder why they can't deal with the intensity, so they subscribe to the Tinder app on their phone and become friends with benefits. Give me the sex with no emotional or psychological interrelating. You can see what an intense generation this is. And if we look at it from this perspective of this 8th house Pluto Scorpio codependency and the need for the Taurian self-reliance, this is a generation of souls who've come in with some pretty intense, intimate karma. And without awareness, typically 7 out of 10 of these couples, evolutionary state of consciousness, are going to just perpetuate this karma with each other. It doesn't mean everybody in consensus state will be this way, but how many of them are going to have the wherewithal to just back up and recognize this intensity and exposure and the love, hate, attract, repulsion that's going on between them, and have the maturity to work through it. Most of these souls haven't reached their Saturn return yet. I have a nephew who's just going through his Saturn return and is experiencing all of this. Pluto and Scorpio generation, I'm not remembering the Pluto composite house between them. Relationship started as a lie. She tried to pass a pregnancy off as his. He fell in love with the baby. She finally left him because he was having a relationship with the child instead of her. He had all this anger come up when she jumped right into the next relationship. They are still legally married, and he finally got the wherewithal to start initiating the divorce proceedings when she posted her engagement to someone else on Facebook. Mind you, this is the person she's been, moved out of one house, moved into the next one. And I don't need to go into more details, but you get the point. So instead of seeking to understand the psychological dynamics that's going on within one another, they just resorted into the emotional psychological vomit onto each other, and this generation does it publicly on Facebook. So you get the picture here of how intense it can be and just how perpetuating the karmic dynamics can be if each individual isn't moving towards the Taurian self-reliance. So when you come off of past lives, current lives, of these violations of trust in various ways, It'll set up the dynamic where these couples have a need to test each other. They need to make sure where the other is coming from. What is that other person's intentions and motivations? This is due to all of those prior life separations. It's due to those prior life feelings and experiences of being betrayed and abandoned and violations of trust. In the situation that I am speaking about with this young adult who is within our family environment on my side, there was also the observation from those of us outside that, not only was there a violation of trust in regards to the pregnancy, there was a lot of intention and motivations going after the pocketbook. So this is a situation in the year of marriage where the our young adult made almost 100 grand, North Dakota oil fields, and is having to file for bankruptcy. File for bankruptcy before the divorce so that the financial issues are on both individuals' shoulders. Just one example, and we look at it from the outside just going, where's your head? What so you can see the magnetic attraction, the mesmerizing intensities that go on, and everybody else is going, are you crazy? Are you nuts? What is wrong with you? And yet, again, there is a need for these types of souls to penetrate and expose each other individually with their own individual karma and together with karma they've created with each other that's going to have to be resolved sooner or later. So each of them has unconscious desire to make the other person prove their love, their motivations and intentions for wanting to be together. Show me the money, show me the stuff, buy me the new car, give me the house. My nephew went through all of that stuff. Didn't matter a bit. My nephew was just as responsible here for not opening his eyes and seeing what was going on. So there's always this probing and penetrating into each other's inner being in order to make sure, to test them, to figure out where they're coming from, and to make sure that they're really being honest with them. They're really coming from where they say they're coming from. So another thing that can happen, though, with this Pluto signature is for these couples to be together too much. An excessive proximity, wherein proximity equals security, because each one always has an eye on the other person. This is due to the insecurity within each partner, and it's due to the unconscious insecurity linked to prior life separations, violations of trust, betrayal, abandonment, etc. The excessive proximity causes its own sexual, emotional, psychological distortions of all varieties. It can become a causal factor in loss of perspective on the relationship and one another as individuals. It can be a causal factor in the fear of becoming possessed or swallowed up by one another and the relationship, or enmeshment in one of its worst forms. It can be a causal factor in one or the other or both of them, trying to assert an egocentric will, and it can manifest as either a partial or total withdrawal from the other person. It can be a causal factor in seeking out external activities in which the other is excluded. The external activities, environments, experiences are commonly secretive in nature for three reasons. One or both is unconsciously trying to undermine or sabotage the relationship relative to the fear of being swallowed up by it. One or both is trying to assert his or her egocentric will to do whatever they please without any restrictions. And one or both is motivated by a vindictive desire to get back or get even with the other one for some wound that has been created by the other. This results in a karma of secrets, and it causes what we know as that famous karma of dishonesty. A karma of secrets and dishonesty with each other. Again, too much codependency, creating the fear of being swallowed up, or one wanting to have control, or one wanting to get even. You can see all of these famous Scorpio 8th house games that get played with this signature. And, we all have an 8th house in our chart. We all have an 8th house in a composite chart if we're in relationship. We all have Scorpio in our individual charts. We have Scorpio on a house cusp in a composite chart. So we can all feel relevancy to this in various degrees. So this Pluto signature, many couples will typically have deep unresolved anger or rage at one another. Each will feel that the other one has been dishonest. Each will feel used, manipulated, betrayed, abandoned by the other. So that love-hate dynamic or attraction-repulsion dynamic becomes quite strong in this Pluto signature. The desire to hurt one another can be quite strong due to the unresolved anger and rage. Again, this will operate on a primarily on an unconscious level in the beginning of the relationship. And as time goes on, it becomes more and more conscious, the need to get even. The need to get even. And I watched this go through with my nephew and the soon-to-be ex over, actually took 4 years of time together, where then everything became distorted and nobody could trust anybody to say anything. Mind you, from the very beginning, I was saying this person is starting the relationship with a lie. How can you even go forward? And that was the level of Pluto and Scorpio codependency within this family member. There can also be, with this Pluto signature, a desire to dominate or control by force of will. Creates power struggles in the relationship. It will be centered on whose will dominates, whose needs are most important, who will the relationship revolve around. We can also have each partner attempting to dominate the other's will in active and intense ways. One partner may dominate as the other becomes more passive. And then here again, the passive partner is going to attempt to assert their will through seeking out external activities and people that the other person knows nothing about. We can have mutual power struggles with several behavioral manifestations. One partner can present themselves to the other as someone who is totally aware of what the other person's issues and problems are. In other words, they're going to set themselves up as the de facto therapist to the other person. One will play the role of the one playing the role of the therapist is going to have the capacity to identify the weakest emotional dynamics of the other person. And the power struggles will occur when the dependent one attempts to either break free or actually heal those wounds. And the one in the therapist role is going to resist because the relationship and their security depends upon the status quo. It depends upon them having the upper hand while the dependent one maintains the wound. Sometimes both partners will alternate back and forth in the roles of the counselor and counselee. Each one will be invested in maintaining whatever their orientation is for XYZ security and power needs. One common example can be the male invested in the counselor role when it comes to sexuality or money and running the household. The female could be invested in having the counselor role when it comes to raising the children and who's doing the right thing there. It'll bounce back and forth with various dynamics relative to individual charts. The power struggle dynamics can also create a relationship that can be reduced to sexual addiction. Both partners in this case will have a strong magnetic attraction to one another without really knowing why. And when it's based on just sexuality, there's no basis for knowing one another. There's no basis for mental communications. I would say you can even add in the emotional communications as well. So their merging gets reduced to just sexuality. And when we have these sexual addiction dynamics in a relationship, one partner can attempt to totally possess and own the other. Sexual slavery with the submissive partner is expected. Sexual slavery results in the submissive partner being expected to be available for sex on demand at any time. The slave partner is typically very insecure and in need of emotional nurturing due to some type of childhood wounding. One or both parents were either physically or emotionally unavailable or not there. We could even have some of the distortions of incest in childhood here in extremes. The submissive partner learns that their needs can be met as long as they make themselves available sexually. There is also the component that the sexual intensity will unlock buried emotions that have been suppressed from childhood for that submissive partner. So that submissive or slave partner becomes addicted to the sexual dynamics as a way to feel alive. The dominating partner is typically attracted to the sexual taboos and will want to force those on to the relationship. What happens though is over time, sexuality is not enough to sustain the relationship. Sooner or later, there will be a termination of the relationship, and one or both will seek out other people to become involved with. All right, I'm going to take a little water break here before we go into the different evolutionary states with Composite, Pluto, 8th, or Scorpio. Questions or comments of anything that I've said to this point? Anything that I may not have touched upon? Thank you for letting me have my liquids here.
Michelle, are you on the line? Are you mic'd?
I am.
Go ahead with your question for Kim. Or did you have a question? I noticed your hand raised on the board here, so I wanted to cue you up. Did you have a question for Kim? Okay, sorry, Kim. The hand was raised, but I think
She may just be practicing and may have muted or unmuted herself. And Michelle, I so hope it's okay if I use your name. From your environmental conditionings, yes, you can see some of your example just being played right out here. So I'll try and move through these 3 evolutionary states.
Can you hear me?
Yes, so we can get to chart example. Hi, honey.
Oh, okay. Hi, I was trying to figure out how to turn on the microphone.
yeah, you're loud and clear now.
Okay, I'll unmute. I didn't have any questions, and yes, you can use my name.
All right, thank you very much, sweetie. I'll get through the rest of this material so we can look at some charts.
Okay.
So when we have consensus evolutionary state for a couple, there's going to be a mutual desire to confront the existing nature of limitations that have brought them together life after life. Typically, these limitations are going to be based upon the traditional gender assignments, with male having power over female. The female has her own deep inner power, yet it has been overridden by the dominating will of the male. Confrontations will occur when the female attempts to assert her own will, either covertly or overtly. Leroy, you might want to mute yourself, honey. The confrontations have produced hurtful words that are unresolved. I would say also hurtful actions are possible that are unresolved. And there's an accumulative wound or wounds that are linked with anger, rage, and the need to hurt one another in order to get back. This is going to cycle with attempts to emotionally renew after the battles with either atonement words and or lovemaking. So it will create some pretty intense love-hate dynamics that cycle back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Many times the male has been unfaithful past lives and sometimes the current life. The female may also have been unfaithful when emotional needs were not met by the partner. The jealousy becomes a constant problem because, again, the unconscious memories causing a projection of such fears in each subsequent life, including the current life. When Eighth house Pluto couples each have codependency and they're not accessing the Taurian self-reliance, the polarity point. Then the degree of jealousy will be relative to the degree of codependency that each of them have. There can also be a mutual desire to obtain material power from existing society, and sometimes they, one or both, can be clever or underhanded and even dishonest with various schemes to accomplish this goal. I used to tell my nephew, who have been doing his chart with astrology since 8th grade, and I used to tell him, you have to be careful. You are too caring and loving, and you're going to find someone who's going to trap you into diapers and a mortgage payment. And it's exactly what happened. And so sometimes if we have one or both individuals in which there's been this dishonesty or underhandedness in material goods and achieving them, they can be denied in this life, or they can be lost in this life as a karmic consequence. So I'm not saying that my family member is innocent here. Here's someone who went from a six-figure income in one year to filing bankruptcy the next year. And it wasn't without his mom and aunt and uncle and everybody kind of, giving some comments about budgets and resources and throwing resources away on the spouse and the child, etc., when there were other values that perhaps he needed to be looking at. Learned them a little bit the hard way. That mutual desire to obtain material power from existing society can create a condition whereby the couple becomes isolated from each other in every way except through that shared desire to get ahead and build the resources. In this case, they'll be highly secretive regarding the inner workings and goings on of their relationship with others. They can create a unified front that is difficult to penetrate. They can be highly suspicious of others. It can be difficult to trust each other and everyone else. If you don't trust self, how do you trust anyone else? Sexually, this Pluto signature, the power problems of past lives make it very difficult for each of them, either one of them, to become vulnerable with each other. They create an inner buffer that does not allow for penetration to the heart or soul. Sexual relations can be very intense in order to feel penetrated in some way, and the sex as power can also become a dynamic or no sex at all, and the energy is transmuted into focusing entirely upon material goals. When they're together for the material goals, and sex is the only way to merge, they have the intensity of the sexuality followed by distance. Again, they never really merge or penetrate on a deep level with each other. And this again creates its own karma that builds up to be resolved in a future life. When we look at the individuated state of consciousness with this Pluto signature, it's going to correlate to couples who have come together many, it says many lifetimes in order to empower one another. The basis of the initial attraction in every life has been a shared commonality of wounds acquired from other people and circumstances. Both will symbolize to each other then a great magnetic power of an undefined nature. It will create a hypnotic effect that mesmerizes both of them. And the attraction then becomes compulsive due to the effect of this magnetic power that they each have for one another, that they don't quite understand why. The need to penetrate each other's souls will cause an uncovering of wounds that each has then also created in each other in the past. And again, over time, the unresolved anger begins to manifest between them. So again, that individuated state, there is going to be the initial attraction because they're going to share a commonality of wounding together from life and other people. And there's a camaraderie in that wounding, and it creates an intense initial attraction. And then as time goes on and they start penetrating to the depth of each other's souls, what arises is the wounds that they've created in each other. Then after that, the unresolved anger comes to the surface. So it creates a duality of experience together. On one hand, there is an incredible connectedness with an intense emotional communion. Each one is evolved enough to let down the emotional guard and share to the depth of their soul. Each person can actually be or seem like a true emotional healing balm to the other person. Each can feel validated by the other. Each can feel like the other person is truly there for them. So, in this case, there can be deep emotional, psychological, and soul work that can be accomplished as both of them confront the nature of their wounds and attempt to heal those wounds together. That emotional connectedness cycle can lead to exploring all kinds of knowledge-based systems together. All the occult sciences, all the self-help books. Again, individuated state here. The nature of human conditioning in general, specific to them, and the nature of sexuality and exploring all of the different ways of being sexual together. And then the surfacing of the wounds leads to the second or other cycle. The surfacing of the wounds that they have each inflicted upon one another can also produce cycles of vindictiveness. And when this happens, they both result in attempting to getting back at one another in various ways. And in its extreme, this is where we can start to have various types of sadistic behaviors with one another. The abandonment, the betrayals of trust, the using, the manipulating. It's not that this can't happen in consensus as well. It does. We all can know, the good old battered wife syndrome doesn't exist with just composite 6th house Plutos. It can be here in the 8th house as well, and it can have all of the sexual extremes and distortions here. Sexually, in the individuated state, each will have desires to merge with the other. Both will have attractions to exploring sexuality beyond the existing conventions of society. There can be an attraction to sexual taboos, and it will be an inner empowering in the relationship. They can have a snubbing of noses at the sexual conventions of society, and both will desire an intensity of sexual sensation that will allow all of their emotions to be experienced. The sexual dynamic is typically very compulsive. And again, that there's still that deep desire to penetrate and merge with each other on a soul level starts to become compulsive in the individuated state, that it's not entirely conscious yet. And so we can still have the compulsiveness of that sexual dynamic used as a way of controlling and manipulating the relationship. There can still be sexual and emotional dishonesty. It can have occurred wherein both had secret affairs in past lives and possibly in the current life as well. Meaning, anytime you have composite Pluto in the 8th house or the Pluto in Scorpio generation, even as you're moving into the individuated and spirituated states of consciousness, there is going to be a history of being together on an intimate level in past lives, and relative to coming through the consensus state together with all of its codependency and all of its distortions of these archetypes. It's not unusual where these signatures will, in which these signatures are such that the affairs were there. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when, how many. So it's unnatural for them to have been there in past lives. And so that karma of sexual dishonesty linked with emotional dishonesty is still there. And it can then intensify all those fears of the ego that start to come through. Can't trust this person, got to test them, got to make sure. All of this stuff can still be taking place in the individuated state, even as we have a couple who's trying to rebel from society and rebel sexually from society. They will still have all of these distortions within them. There can also be the using of each other then to work out sexual desires and fantasies. This isn't of a quote-unquote negative level. Again, individuated state of consciousness is trying to break free from societal patterns and taboos and find their own natural individual laws. But they can, relative to the betrayals in the past and the lack of trust, there can be a resulting using of one another. Both can do it, one or another can do it. So when this is the case, neither one is really conscious of this dynamic. They will be playing out their fantasies, and it will create the illusion of love because the sexual energy is so intense. And it will serve both of the partners in fulfilling needs for the emotional, psychological, and soul renewal. However, there can still be hurt from, again, the emotional or sexual infidelity. Remember, it will be there from past lives, so it's there unresolved. on an unconscious level, and it can surface. And there may perhaps be a tendency for it to occur again in this life, if they've not been, one or both have not been correcting this dynamic within themselves, reaching towards deeper self-reliance. So when we do have that emotional or sexual infidelity, it can be very overwhelming when it occurs. And even in the individuated state of consciousness, neither one can really forgive the other when it occurs. They can make attempts on it on a mental level, but on that emotional level, once that trust has been violated, it can be very hard for this Pluto signature to recover from it. When we are looking at the spirituated state of consciousness with composite Pluto in the 8th house or Scorpio, this is going to correlate to a couple who mutually desires to allow the power of God, Goddess, to infuse the very essence of the relationship. Over many lifetimes, the couple has experienced many different forms of spirituality from many different types of cultures, and they are together with a combined need and desire for proof of source energy. So they're going to be orientated to many different practices and methods that allow for this proof to occur from within. For those of you who are enrolled in segment 1, when we worked with natal Pluto in the 8th house or Scorpio last week, again, the desire to know source is based upon sensation. It's based upon emotions. It's not taken on blind spiritual faith. It is not a mental knowledge. It has to be experienced with all of the senses. It has to be felt. It has to be tasted. It has to be the goosebumps on the flesh, the hair rising up on the back of the neck. It has to be an osmosis experience, bringing source within self. And this is also the case then as these couples evolve and expand in consciousness to know source through the sensational experience as well. These couples then create a common spiritual baseline as a foundation to the relationship, and it creates a necessary strength that allowed both of them to experience a progressive surfacing of all of the wounds they've incurred over lifetimes. This will include wounds that each of them have individually from many different sources, and it will include wounds that they have created with and to each other. So this is going to reflect a couple who has traveled a long karmic and evolutionary journey together. It's going to reflect a couple who has more or less succeeded in staying together despite the temptation to separate in other lifetimes due to the problems encountered. In other words, the desire to merge on a soul level was the stronger desire, and it sustained them. The soul love that they had toward one another has been stronger than the potential undermining effect of various wounds. This is a couple that has learned to empower each other as of a result of staying together through the soul love. This is a couple that has learned that the ultimate security for the relationship is found in a mutual commitment to source energy. These couples can be a spiritual powerhouse together. Many others will be attracted to them for their counsel. They will symbolize what many other couples are desiring to become, and they could manifest a spellbinding magnetic effect on other people. These are couples that will feel drawn to give to others as necessary. It will still be very secretive and protective of the inner nature of their own relationship. They can be very silent together, very comfortable with it. There will be a high degree of telepathic awareness with each other. Any issues that arise will be focused upon very intently. They will be processed through efficiently rather than allowed to stew and result back into the fears of the betrayals of trust, etc., etc. Sexually, there will be a focus upon sacred sexual practices such as tantric methods. The methods will be sued. The methods will be used. I didn't take the time to proof my typing here today. Methods will be used to penetrate to each other's souls and access the divinity within each of them. This will allow for penetration to ultimate divinity together. And the methods used, in other words, sexuality, will be just as important as meditation or any other spiritual practices. The intensity of sensation produced in the body through sexuality will be used to penetrate and remove all blockages within consciousness that prevent an experiencing of an inner divinity. It's a baseline for couples to engage in other ways of being sexual, as both desire to exhaust sexual desires to allow for the rapid evolutionary process of the soul. Both realize again that the sexual desire is one of the main binding forces keeping souls engaged in reality on earth. And they will also realize that the last exhausting desire to release is the sexual one. So, Pluto polarity point, second house. Evolutionary intent is for couples to realize that each has been mutually responsible for what has occurred within the relationship, past and present. It is essential that each learns how to forgive the other for whatever has occurred. And it's best realized when both can understand that they have come together to bring to the surface the impurities and limitations in each other. This can then be followed by the realization that even though there's been great hurt by and with each other, there is still a deep love emanating towards each other on a soul level. And their wounds are healed by orientated towards the soul love. It is essential that each partner learns how to allow the other to identify and supply their own essential needs. Again, the famous second house Pluto polarity point is going to be self-reliance. Each person being responsible for themselves. Each person identifying, supplying what they each need. This is going to allow each person then to be self-reliant, which allows for true self-empowerment individually and of each other. And so then the relationship evolves to become more and more powerful and metamorphic for each person. With individual self-reliance, each partner will learn the difference between wanting to simply be together because they want to be together versus that addictive compulsion to be together because of what each symbolically represents to the other. Remember, we're attracted to what we sense we lack in ourselves. We're attracted to those capabilities, abilities, resources, etc. that each wants from the other relative to perceived lack. As I like to say this, we come together to merge to be more than what we were before the merging. However, we end up in codependency unless we step back and become self-reliant again with whatever we've osmosised into ourselves due to the merging. So, when we have that individual self-reliance, we'll have a couple that eliminates the karma of use and manipulation, the betrayals that follow when use has been outworn. Here we have couples who must learn not to be afraid when each of them desires to have independent experiences. They must learn new ways of being secure together through individual self-reliance and individual experiences. These couples, above all else, must learn to be totally honest with each other in every way to eliminate the karma of secrets. Even when that honesty is ugly and unpleasant and hard and uncomfortable to do, it is still what is necessary. Absolute honesty. For the couples who've evolved into spirituated states of consciousness, they must realize when they become spiritually enmeshed and dependent upon each other for strength in their spiritual progressing, they must learn how to be apart at times in order to spiritually progress on an individual basis, individual effort. Essentially, God Goddess Source energy wants any soul to be ultimately dependent upon it alone, even when it is the binding force in the relationship, such as it is with Pluto in Scorpio or the 8th house. There is the potential to have an enforced loss of one another unless both realize this step and take appropriate action. In other words, like I said again, that composite Pluto 8th house Scorpio merges, becomes more than it was, and comes back to be two distinct individuals. This is ultimately true no matter what state of consciousness. And you can see how it can be even more important here in that spirituated level. We're all in process of merging back on the evolutionary journey, and yet we still have to be careful with this signature of becoming spiritually codependent rather than merging back with Source, the partner becoming the de facto God-Goddess signature. All right, so if anybody questions or comments, I know we have small groups in segment 2 on a personal or on an
webinars.
on the live webinars. Thank you. Let me put the chart up as I gotta get in touch with my left brain here a little bit. For the recording, here's the female's chart, January 14th, 1969, 9:29 a.m., Tucson, Arizona. Rising is 1 degree Pisces. The female has a 7th house, Pluto in Virgo, 25 degrees retrograde. Uranus is new phase, 3 degrees Libra, 7th house retrograde, and sandwiched in between them is a south node at 3 degree, Uranus 4 Libra, south node 3 Libra. So we have that south node here sandwiched in between Uranus and Pluto. So here we're really going to have the karma of drawing in this variety of relationships and the relive fruition aspect intertwined here as they really try to move over and access that whole independent nature and be authentically who they are in relationships. Now, with the female, I'm just going to go off of some of my memory here. I would say that we have someone who, is definitely moving from third individuated to first spirituated, maybe a little back and forth. And if you disagree with me, honey, fine. You're more than welcome. Correct me. And, did you have Catholic background as well? I know that your mother had cancer for a long period, what 2 decades here. Your younger upbringing revolved around her sickness. Father came from Italian mafia background, time in prison when you were younger, and now I think your mom is gone, but father is still alive, and I think you do have a relationship with father now. Let me see. You're a massage therapist, astrologer, Reiki master. I'll move into the relationship history a little later. 2 children, 2 young adult men, if I remember Facebook correctly, 2 different fathers. Never married either one of the fathers. Both were abusive. You've been studying metaphysics for a long time period. So just briefly going through a few things right there. We can bounce back and forth to these charts. Here is the male. This is again a former relationship for the chart, July 1st, 1963, 8:12 p.m., Tucson, Arizona. The rising sign for the male, 20 degrees Capricorn. He has 8th house Pluto at 10 degrees intercepted in Virgo. In the 8th house, Mars here is new phase at 15 degrees Virgo. Uranus is balsamic Pluto, 2 degrees Virgo. South node, poof, barely inside the first house. The ascendant is 20 degrees Capricorn, 10 minutes. South node, 20 degrees Capricorn, 29. As the nodal axis reverses, the south node is balsamic. The first house, getting ready to initiate a new nodal cycle. I would say this is someone who has a lot of karma that's coming home to roost right here. Briefly, some comments. She feels that he is transitioning from third consensus, first individuated. He Mexican-American background, poor family, always trying to fit in, did not learn his native language. Our female said that she thought he was the whitest Mexican she had met. He has a Catholic background, alcoholism in family. He has a daughter from his first wife. I think you guys did actually marry. Yeah, you were his third wife, and he's in process of getting married for the 4th time. In your life since 18, This is an interesting one. They met in outpatient rehab for cocaine addiction. They relapsed after 6 months. He was an extreme addict, left, strong bond, deep life experiences together. There for me when mother passed away. I'm going to move on to the composite houses. I'm reading some of this stuff. Here's the composite Pluto, 10-degree Aquarius rising 40 minutes. Pluto is 17.5 Virgo in the 8th. Uranus's new phase 18.5 Virgo. South node 26, 27 degrees Scorpio, just inside the 10th house. Conjunct the moon at 25 Scorpio, Neptune at 20 degrees Scorpio. There's going to be a little intensity here with an 8th house Pluto and a south node in Scorpio up here. I would say extreme contests of will and various compulsion addictions and the whole sexuality picture. Let me bring some more into it. Partner was really there when mother passed away, started dating again when mom passed away. He cheated, forgave him, married for wrong reasons. He was safe, kids needed him. The female had a lot of grief for mother, pushed him away emotionally as grieving. Times he thought he owned, male thought he owned female, was very intense with sex, wanted it all the time, which didn't work for her. Recovering addict, 10 years by the time we reconnected. The addiction then became sexual. He was also a work addict. In the end, he cheated again. She ended the relationship. Extremely angry after divorce because he completely neglected children that he was with for 10 years, lost everything during divorce, bankruptcy. Last January, wrote him a letter, forgave him, now civil again. Not super close, but still intense connection. I'd like to, really just kind of starting off here, I'd like to unmute our volunteer and just let her speak relative to what she was seeing on class and what's been sparking for her. Many times when we have this class volunteer, you can just take it from there because so much has come about in class, and I'll just add in some points as I see them. So I'd like to, time-wise, just let you speak however you want to first.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, well, I've resonated. Everything that has said regarding 8th house is true on the individuated level, I would say. And you covered everything pretty accurately with Marty and I. Very deep, deep bond. He was my best friend for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Going through, somebody going through recovery and like going from a really horrible part of life to seeing him be very strong and, he got his life back together. That's about when we got married and, or when we got back together before we got married. But, I kind of looked up to him at that point. I thought he was really amazing, and he kind of had something I wanted because my life was in shambles at that point, and so I admired him a lot at that point. But we did have the back and forth thing. It's kind of gone back and forth. There's a very, very deep love between us. There always has been. Even though we're not talking, it's still there. When I met him in rehab, I had checked myself in mostly to get away from my family. They wouldn't let me stay in the hospital. I only made it to outpatient. But he actually went through a whole 3-month program. He was a very bad addict. I think he even was involved in prostitution or like, with prostitutes, things like that. But he, bad cocaine addict, was smoking it. And when I met him, we were, in the recovery part. We weren't using at that time. And I did have past life memory of a Native American past with him. Right when I met him, I had that memory. And it was him that somehow captured me as a white person, and I was held hostage, so I had to live with him. So I remember that from past life memory. So we, obviously have a history. It's very deep. And then he also adopted my oldest child. And so that's where part of that anger came from, is after we got divorced, he's done nothing at all. He like completely abandoned them. So I was really angry for a while, but now I had to get over it, so I didn't carry that anymore.
Did the children, so he abandoned them, is there any type of relationship with your two sons and him?
With the younger one, the older one is angry at him. He kind of will call or text once in a while, but my oldest pretty much doesn't have a very strong opinion of him because he has abandonment issues from his real father also.
That's another story.
Yeah, we have lots of stories, but the younger one is more of a manipulative person, so he, when he needs things, he knows how to become friends with people to keep them around. So he's got a different relationship. So, and then he is getting married again November 1st. So he's found a new person, and he's usually always in a relationship also. I think he drinks now. He rides a Harley. He's in a band. Basically he's in the mortgage business, very much in that realm of finance.
Sure. Sure. Looking back on his chart right here. Yes. And this is someone who's got to be in charge, at all times. And this Saturn signature too, also in, the first house, it's, this will be defensiveness. I've got to be in charge. I've got to be the boss. And I would say that he has an ability in that work and career environment to be very magnetizing to people, good salesman, to also be able to penetrate into anybody's emotional weaknesses. And if he's not coming from the highest and best, there can be some real subtle manipulations that go on here. And
he's both.
Relative to the evolutionary state, this might be the case. Now, that doesn't mean he's not going to have his own emotional shocks and upsets, because he's the 8th house Pluto, trying to get him towards self-reliance, trying to get him to work on and recognize his own emotional needs. The Jupiter square the nodes. I always see Jupiter square the nodes as getting to truth with self, the whole lies versus truth themes. So where's the dishonesty? Then here it is in Aries 3rd house, relative to the individual, relative to third consensus, it might be careful of, again, more of the manipulations, or what do I have to say to get what I want? And that it's not germane to that evolutionary state. You can have consensus people who are the utmost of honesty. But just some of the background that you're saying, he has to be working through some of this on an individual basis for himself. And how well is he doing that? One of the things that I'm seeing here with your whole composite chart, well, two things that I'm seeing here. So yes, there is the deep love, and there will be that coming together at some point again, all right?
Oh no.
You as an individual level, oh, I know, this is so true for almost any of the Pluto houses we look at, so when you look at that, you should have heard me last month. I'm going, okay, it's okay to come around with this guy again, but please, not as lovers, okay?
Yeah.
What you would be wanting to do is just really hold your own intent towards honesty, 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 honesty whenever you think of him, so that you are energizing this in this life to be a foundation and resource in a future life as it cycles back around again. Okay? That would be the
Okay.
most important way for you to address it as an individual. You have the seventh house Pluto and all your own history of relationships and the compare and contrast going on here. You've got a certain amount of relive in order to really access your own independence, your own sense of self. So you're going to be wanting to energize that energy regardless of the partner, regardless of any potential partner. And the more you can be working to access this yourself, regardless, you're creating your own sense of self, individuality, your own self-reliance, your own sense of this is me regardless, and I don't have to be blown about by the winds of all the relationships. And then that's going to relate with this person that, however you do come back around again, you're affecting the self-reliance with him. So he's either evolving and you're ready to move into that deeper soul love, or you recognize the games and you say, not yet, and you move on. So you don't have to look at it as, I'm fated to be hurt all over again by this person. No, no. Especially because you're the one who was cheated on this time around twice.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to settle for that type of situation to be the norm between you. And this is going to be, further reiterated by the fact that on this 17-degree polarity point within orb is Saturn here. And you can even draw Chiron into this, all right? So there's an evolutionary intent to move out of the confusion, especially confusion around resources and self-reliance, to recognize I can do this all myself, so that you release that sense of abandonment that was there, especially on a resource level, when you had the courage to walk away from the cheating. And then what you can be doing relative to the energy within your combined souls, you can be working to make that spiritual pursuit and spiritual honesty there. The natural spiritual laws, as we know with EA, you can be working to make that reality for you so that it helps you with healing within him. And this is all potential that you can use to be gaining strength so that any future encounters don't wipe the rug out from underneath you. Understand this?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
And when last year when I wrote him the letter forgiving him for his part of the, I also said I said I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did also.
Mm-hmm.
Because I
Mm-hmm.
was pretty evil when we broke up. I mean, the wrath came out, and
Oh, yeah, really?
oh yeah, I can, and I knew him so well. I knew how to hurt him very well, even with words,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
I did admit it, and I told him I'm sorry, I'm sorry that I hurt you, and I don't even know what I said, but I said, I don't think what you did was right, but I forgive you and I see my part in it. And then when we saw each other, he put his hand over his heart and he just like cried and he was like, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Because he needed the healing also. But
Oh, yeah.
he never, admitted anything or apologized back, but it was just kind of
Well,
a mutual thing.
well, you know the story. Forgiveness is for our own healing and growth, not the other
Right.
person, you know.
Exactly.
And so, you are correct. There could be lifetimes here with the South Node signature added in, lifetimes here in which their whole, abandonment, betrayals of trust. Bringing Neptune into any picture becomes confusion. All right. So who knows the origin of your lifetimes together? Moon Neptune in the ninth, excuse my burp, can bring in the indigenous signature. So can Scorpio, but it may go back further than that. And it's quite possible that there has been the emotional game playing and control games that went on, each of you trying to get the upper hand in order to secure the relationship. And Neptune coming in confuses the picture as to whose emotions are whose wounds are whose manipulations are who. And so, yes, I think it's quite possible that it's went back and forth for both of you. And when this happens, it's so important that each person, again, affects the second house polarity of self-reliance, owns up to their own responsibility in it, as we saw with the polarity point signature. And you don't have to be dependent upon him catching up to for you to have the freedom to continue to evolve and grow. Now, the other thing that I see that's going on here, you notice Uranus new phase to Pluto, you're trying to break free from all these patterns. And you see Mars is fairly new phase as well. So there probably has already been a whole cycle with these 8th house Pluto lifetimes of hurt and vindictiveness and game playing. It is possible that you are trying to break free from all of this stuff with these two planets, new phase Pluto. Now, Uranus Pluto, 17, 18 degrees. Bring Neptune over here at 20. Look at the yod down here, okay, with Sun, Mercury. So this also becomes very important in the polarity point. I'll back up. Ruler of the South Node by sign is the Sol, Pluto itself. Ruler of the South Node by house. Here's Saturn sitting on the polarity point. So the rulers of the South Node are extremely involved in the karmic complex, emphasizing the need for self-responsibility in addition to self-reliance on all these levels. You each have to become responsible for healing your own wounds. As you do that, you work to heal wounds together. This is where some of, I would say, the karma still exists with this yod that can be somewhat uncomfortable because, again, Mercury conjunct the sun. It's new phase. It is trying to start a new cycle here. But in Aries, with this energy, every time one of you got emotionally triggered or felt used, abused, literally, or perceived, what would happen here is the sparks would start flying and the words would start to go all over the place. And pretty soon the emotional triggers were flying so high, there was no analyzation or second thoughts with these yods. There was no backing up here to take a breath and go, wait a minute, what are we doing? What are we escalating here? And the whole purpose of the yod is to slow down, take a breath, and analyze how the words are hurting, to analyze the effects that you are having on each other, not only on an emotional level, egoic level, but also on a deeper soul level as well. So that ability to really think before speaking is something that is probably some of the most important evolutionary lessons between you. Now, I commend you for being able to write him that letter and really say what you said and go through what you did. That is a real reflection on the evolutionary progression of your own soul. And that is a very good example of this yod evolving past the hurt and the pain and, recognizing that self-forgiveness that is so important.
Mm-hmm.
The North Node reiterates the self-reliance. It reiterates the emotional self-reliance of the Moon South Node conjunction here and how you're going to go through abandonment betrayal with each other until you are really affecting this on a conscious egoic level. And then this can, deepen this polarity point of affecting self-reliance rather than trying to, again, battle back and forth over dominant will and control of each other. So this is a breaking free signature with this yod here. And to me, you've been affecting it.
Yes. Well, what's amazing is since we have split up, that's exactly what's happened. I worked for him. He wanted me to work for him. He didn't want me to work outside of his work back then. It was easier if I was his assistant and he thought we could keep all the money in the house and he was in control of the finances and everything.
Little financial karma going on too, huh?
Yeah, and then I wanted to be a massage therapist a long time ago, but I became one, later, and basically have done everything I wanted to do a long time ago since the divorce. After we lost everything, and then also.
Can you tell me do you care to share the circumstances around losing everything financially, because this is somewhat germane to 8th house Pluto?
Sure. We owned 3 houses. We had a 5-bedroom, 2,800 square foot house. He had another house that he had before we were married. He had a Harley, stuff. And then we had just built a brand new house, a 3,000 square foot house on an acre and a half of land below the mountains in Tucson. It was beautiful. And that's when I just left. I walked away after I found out he was with somebody else. The market had crashed right then. It was in 2008. So we couldn't sell anything. Everything was just, locked up. And we were way, way over our head. He, borrowed from one place and another place to accumulate all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, we shouldn't have had it all in the first place. It was that expansion time. And then when I moved out, we were supposed to settle, and I agreed on a very low amount of money, but that's not what happened. We ended up filing bankruptcy in order to have the divorce go through, and then we also got audited by the IRS at that time, so we owed $5,000 to the IRS. Yeah, so just it was just like a big crash.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
a big starting over.
So it is possible that there could have been some karmic buildup around the whole resources situation with the Saturn opposition, with South Node in the 10th, perhaps some prior life abuse of resources or underhandedness for planets in the second, Venus and Taurus, North Node. It's possible that there was, again, some buildup of dishonesty around resources that, even though it wasn't maybe consciously understood or seen in this lifetime, some, evening out on a karmic level that went through.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that it also, even though probably at the time it was quite shocking and quite painful, it might be possible for you, it allowed you to have a busting out and breaking free from that resource karma with this relationship. It gave you that ability to start anew, start fresh.
Oh, I had to completely turn to spirit to survive that. It was one of the hardest times in my life.
Well, and especially, because what on father and side and grandfather's side, coming from, mafia background,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
some of that whole familial karma in that area. So probably quite possible you've broken, you've had a chance to break free from it individually in some ways as well.
My
Here's,
dad built the house.
say again, what? What?
My father built our house.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah,
No
never
wonder,
thought of that one.
no wonder the IRS came looking on your doorstep. So I was
Yeah.
just looking to see by some chance. Okay, so Pluto was transiting through the 10th house here when we had the crash, and it moved from Sag to Capricorn in your chart. And so the classic, fall from grace, rebirth, restarting over, that has been going on for you.
Right.
hmm And I'm looking to see, and here is Uranus transiting Uranus, just sidetracking here a little bit, transiting Uranus, going back and forth over this Saturn. Look at how you've been building up your own talents and resources with Uranus in new ways. The courage to break free from your familial background. And it's
Yeah.
not to say that there might not be a few more things here with Uranus square the Sun, Pluto balsamic it. It'll be a few years before it goes over. So it might be too early yet to sense what any of that might be from the Pluto or soul perspective. But in general, a lot of breaking free from conditionings and really being able to access your first house polarity point, independence and standing on your own, which Saturn reiterates here.
Right.
Yeah. Let me see. Is there any questions or comments that you might have for me, or if anybody else is on the line in regards to this signature, in regards to the composite chart? Excuse me.
I'm good.
Well,
I don't know if anyone has questions.
I'll just check in with Leroy. Leroy, any comments or questions from you? I really appreciate you allowing us to use your chart as example. It was just like boom, 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 just totally related to composite eighth house Pluto, huh?
Yes, it was good.
Mm.
Well, I can make another comment that when was the conference? In 2006 when I went to South
2000,
Dakota?
yes, yep, back in 2006,
So that,
Pluto late degree Sag.
that was my first escape. That's when I finally started to really individuate out of the relationship, and he didn't like that too much. But
Literally. Did he know
I
you?
left.
Did he know you went to an astrology conference?
Oh yeah, he paid for it.
Okay.
But I was, I already had studied astrology for a long time, but
Okay.
that was my escape from, not having anyone to talk to. That's when I was so into the evolutionary astrology and learning it in the beginning. And he kind of was jealous. Yeah.
Mhm.
He
Mhm.
didn't like it that I even read books. I mean, because I would read in bed and that would bother him. And then when I stopped being Catholic sometime around then also because that's when the priests were raping children, and I finally had enough, and I just took my kid. I said, I'm not going to, follow this anymore. And I kept, the tradition stuff kept, it was still there.
Mhm.
But I finally just stopped. And when we were getting divorced, he made a comment, and he was like, I can't believe my wife doesn't want to go to church with me. And I go, you don't even go to church. I'm like, what are you talking about? Because he didn't, but he was embarrassed that I wouldn't be Catholic, and I was rebelling against everything, basically.
The third stage consensus, it's all about the appearance.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference, in EA, that we call it that evolutionary discrepancy when the two individual partners are at different evolutionary states of consciousness. And
Right.
that adds to the mix of the composite eighth house Pluto as well. So on his side, a lot of the distortions in the infidelity and the sexual addiction and resource, distortions. And, from your perspective, that individuated really being able to break free and stand on your own, it complicated. So it's almost like between the two of you, you've went across the board with a lot of the dynamics we mentioned, consensus and individuated.
Yes, everything you mentioned in the overview of eighth house, I could relate to.
Uh-huh.
Definitely.
Well, congratulations for breaking free, honey.
Thank you. It's been an interesting ride.
Well, Leroy's been kind of quiet, so unless he speaks up real soon, I assume that no further questions or comments, and we'll let everybody go. And I just want to say thank you so much. I appreciate you taking time out of your work schedule to be live on the call, and really appreciate you willing to volunteer, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. It's good to be back in the A.
Yeah. Good to have you back, sweetie pie.
Great.
All right. So everyone, thank you very much. I do have a possible volunteer chart for Pluto in the ninth house, but if there is a student with a present or prior intimate relationship, composite Pluto ninth house, I prefer to give a priority to a student. Class will be that third Wednesday, November 18th. Just send me an email if you'd like to be an example. And of course, as we move into the month of November, there's a couple public webinars here. The nodal axis is going to be moving into Virgo Pisces, November 11th. That class has been scheduled. Check your emails from us. And November 16th, I'm going to start a series on the 7 chakras, and we're going to start with the root chakra and survival issues. So you can see the public webinars through the next few months. In the meantime, thank you everyone, those who showed up live and those of you who watch this series afterwards. Thank you all very much for wanting to study with EAN, and we will see you next month, everyone. Adios.